Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are excited to discuss Gmail and talk about strategies to help maximize your inbox placement. Hello, my name is Matthew. I am an Act-On deliverability consultant, and I have been working with email marketing for several years now. And this is my co-presenter.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. This is Alex Cunningham. I am also a deliverability consultant here at Acton, and I have worked in the email deliverability space for over 5 years. All right, so our agenda today. Matt is going to start us off with an overview of Gmail. This is going to be a kind of set the stage for what we're looking at today. So he's going to cover everything Gmail here in the first section. We're then going to delve into the main core components to inbox placement. Those are your technical requirements and setup, your engagement, and your email design. And finally, we will summarize. As you know, a little bit of a precursor here. There is no magic bullet. And finally, a Q&A session.
All right, so let's get into it. To understand Gmail inbox placement, I think you have to understand Google and Gmail as a whole. One of the things that Gmail is concerned with, and one point I do want to drive home for you, is that Gmail is focused on improving their users' experience. They are managing over 1 billion active users, and they are managing billions upon billions of sent and received messages. I think it's an important piece of information that I learned is that Gmail inbox placement rate saw a decline from 85% to 83%, meaning that only one in every 6 commercial emails fails to reach the inbox. This is why we are all here today. One of the things that I like to always remind any of my clients is that Gmail needs to provide a lot of security to its customers. It also needs to provide a lot of solutions that are based on individual preferences and actions and forms of engagement. This is one of the largest email service providers, so they use a lot of aggregate information. We will talk about taking information in aggregate a lot, especially with list maintenance, and understanding that the spam filter, that is community driven, and these sort of community driven efforts are really important to Google. I think it's also worth mentioning that more than 50% of mid-sized US companies use Gmail, and even more impressive, 92% of startups choose Gmail as their business provider. So it's important to play by Gmail's rules. Often what email providers are looking for or cautioning against has a significant overlap between Gmail and others. So at the heart of it is just being a responsible sender to Gmail, as well as anybody else. There are some core important things to keep in mind. Make sure not to abuse people's inboxes. Gmail is looking out for its users and it's tracking their users' information. With so many emails coming in and out, it's important for Gmail to make sure that there are no bad actors or malicious senders. So it takes measures to help protect its users. The most important thing to remember is that if you are not one of the bad guys, don't act like one of the bad guys. So that means don't spam, don't spoof, don't abuse your communication challenges. Don't do massive batch and blasts. Make sure that you have a well-maintained list and you understand the key metrics. Some of the differences that I do like to talk about are going to be Gmail doesn't necessarily have what it labels as what it calls folders, rather labels. It also has filters. We'll go into a little bit more of that later. Additionally, Gmail has a number of add-ons and tools, which we will touch on a little bit later. This includes Postmaster, which is a feedback loop to provide aggregate information.
All right, thanks, Matthew. So with the scene set, we now wanted to dive into the first important piece as it relates to maximizing your inbox placement, and that's going to be your technical setup. All right, so your technical setup is going to start with authentication. So with authentication, some of you may or may not be familiar with what that entails as far as email authentication. But essentially, what we are going to be talking about here is the way in which Gmail and other providers can identify who is sending mail and make sure that that sender is trusted. So with that, I thought it would be helpful to make a comparison to snail mail. So as you know, when you're sending out paper mail, you will need to make sure that you include not only a return address, but also a stamp, which is there to make sure that the email one is being whom it's being sent from, and that it can be trusted. All right, so authentication is going to be, it's very important for a number of different reasons. But for the recipients, what it is doing, it is helping to prevent malicious emails from reaching their inbox. And it is also helping to prevent them from phishing attempts. So those can be extremely detrimental. That is one of the reasons why authentication is at the top of the list for Gmail in terms of where your email is going to be placed, making sure you have that proper configuration. Again, it is going to be used to make sure or to ensure that the email was truly sent from the domain name that it claims to be sent from. So that is kind of, there are a lot of, horrific spoofing stories out there. And those typically occur when authentication is not in place. So someone is able to actually use your domain name to send mail that's not affiliated with your company. It also is going to, with authentication in place, it's going to notify the receiving server that Acton is authorized to send on your behalf. So that's extremely important. They can point back to, with the configuration, they can identify that Acton is able to send your mail and is trusted to send your mail. And finally, it should be, you may or may not know this as well, but DKIM and SPF are going to be set up in every Acton account. If you are unfamiliar with how to go about this, your IT team is certainly going to be the best place to go to, get some assistance with that, as well as the support team here from the Acton side. So in addition to making sure that you have DKIM and SPF in place for authentication, another technical setup is going to be a tool that you may not be familiar with, Postmaster Tools by Gmail. And it's something that we encourage all of our clients to set up. One, because it's free, and two, because it's going to be the way in which you can monitor everything as it relates to Gmail. It is, in fact, the source of truth. The reason for this is that Gmail does not share they don't share feedback loops. And because of that, we can't identify specific recipients that have complained of your email being spam. And so they look at the information in aggregate. And so they use that information to kind of develop that reputation of you as a sender. With Google Postmaster, it allows you to keep and review your domain reputation, your spam report rates, and whether or not your email is properly authenticated.
All right, thank you, Alex. So let's jump into a couple of best practices about authentication. It's always important to remind ourselves, why is this important for Gmail? Again, it's important that they can trust you, and that domain reputation is also a really important factor with delivery for Gmail. 68% of people in the United States base their decision on whether to open an email based on the from address name. So it's important that you are setting up all of your records and your from address. And it's also important for you that nobody else is taking that and spoofing it. You've put a lot of effort into your brand and into building trust. So this is as important as it is for you, as it is for their Gmail users. It's also important to work with your IT team in case you do have questions about your SPF record or your DKIM record. In addition to that, there is also something called DMARC. And this indicates that your SPF record and your DKIM record are in alignment. This isn't required, but it does help with inboxing. So I think it's worth mentioning. All right. So we talked a little bit about what Gmail is looking for and tracking. Then we focused in a little bit about what is happening before you deploy. Let's talk a little bit about what happens after you deploy your messaging with engagement. So once you're beyond the sort of record setup and your message has landed in the inbox, this is the most important component because it is all about providing relative content. Why is engagement important? With billions of messages, Gmail needs to find out if your content is going to be helpful and relevant to their users. One of my clients, who was a medical company, saw a dwindling placement because they were sending to every contact that they had, not necessarily the ones that were most interested in specific medical services, as well as not focusing on whether or not that they were the individuals making the purchasing decisions. So we took a step back. We saw which contacts were opening the message, which contacts were looking at more information, clicking on the order button, providing, providing additional information through form fill outs. And so we were able to identify through the sort of consistent engagement who we needed to focus on. This continued to improve some of their rates because we were able to look at and identify who needed the message. So again, it's always important to drive home that this sort of data is an aggregate. So you really want to make sure that you are understanding that figuring out how to provide relevant content to your subscribers is going to be key. Engagement is important because it indicates how people it indicates whether or not people want the email. So Gmail is tracking who and how contacts are engaging with what you're sending. And this is how Gmail is going to prioritize your email. So keep your eye on some really important key metrics, namely opens and clicks. Other examples of some positive interactions that I think are important for any of you to understand are going to be opens and clicks, as well as forwarding, replying, dragging a message to the primary inbox, or starring or marking a message as important. There are also some negative interactions that are important to understand. This includes marking something as spam, not reading or deleting an email without even opening it. Another metric that is important to understand is if you're going to get marked as phishing. It's important to break the habit of sending to your entire email list. Make sure to suppress subscribers that haven't had any positive interactions with your email messages. One of the pieces of advice that I typically give is that I split the list up into different categories. The most engaged, which is individuals who have opened in the last 30 days, medium engaged, which is individuals who have opened in the last 90 days, unengaged, or which is people who have opened in the last 180 days, and then anybody who hasn't had any positive interaction with your email in the last 360 days, look at sunsetting. Again, Google is looking at in aggregate how many people are engaging with your content. So it's important to keep those sort of metrics in the forefront.
Thanks, Matt. So, with those considerations in mind, we wanted to just put a little bit more emphasis on each of those with, some of our best practices to consider. That is going to start with the way in which you segment your contacts. The most important of which is going to be engaged and unengaged segments. So, the more that you can do that, the better. Obviously, as Matt noted, there are a lot of different levels that you can do that. But the more, again, that you can segment, the better. You also want to definitely keep a close eye on your list hygiene practices. So that's going to be sunsetting unengaged contacts, people that you haven't had any interaction with in over a year, as well as new contacts that you bring to the system, confirming those addresses are accurate, and or any contacts you're bringing in from another system. You also want to make sure that they are fully opted in. And one of the ways in which I like to explain this in terms of the frequency and the volumes is that when someone signs up for your content from your company, you want to make sure that it's relevant, and you also want to make sure that they obviously they have opted in, but you want to make sure that they're getting mail at the frequency that they're expecting to. So those go hand in hand. From the volume side, that's going to relate more towards your overall mailing strategy. So being consistent with the sheer quantity of mail that you send week to week. In Acton, we have a number of features. We've kind of grouped them here in one point, but relevant content is going to be at the forefront. To assist with that, you can use our A/B testing feature to help refine that content. And then we would also definitely encourage you to use personalization and dynamic content when you are designing your emails. You could also consider using different categories for your mail if that's applicable. So as an example here, we have 3 different categories of promotional, transactional, social. We have clients that will use different email addresses for each of those, different types of content. As we've gone over definitely a few times here today, but just trying to really harp on the fact of segmentation and how important that is. Acton's list segmentation feature is very expansive, and there's a lot in which you can almost segment your lists in any way that you like, and we definitely encourage you to feel comfortable with that and to go as far as you can. And lastly, the bounce limit. So to help ensure that you aren't repeatedly sending to someone that's rejecting your mail, their mailbox is full, their server isn't accepting mail at this time, you can set a bounce limit in Acton to limit the number of times that you attempt to reach someone. All right, so we wanted to set aside a tab on our slide here on the promotions tab. So as you all know, and I've probably read, there are a lot of discussions to be had about the promotions tab, and I think there are some misconceptions out there. There are a lot of studies again that have been done, and most of them show that the promotions tab does not negatively impact your open rates or engagement. And the main reason for this is that in the promotions folder, Gmail, obviously their algorithm is very sophisticated. And when an email lands the promotions folder, it is typically going to be a promotional type of mailer. And so with the user, they know that to be the case, and they are more inclined to engage with their email when they're doing it on their time. So when it isn't landing in their primary inbox and they know where to find it, they're more likely to engage with it. It's also important to note that we are unable to identify why a specific email lands in the promotions folder, just based off the sophistication of the algorithm that Gmail uses. It's constantly learning. However, the promotions tab is in fact the inbox. So if someone tries to tell you differently, you can always reference this slide here. Also worth noting that only around 20% of users actually have this enabled. So I would not, it's not worth fighting. It's not worth trying to trick Gmail because of this. And again, people are going to access those emails when they're ready to do so. Okay, and our last important point that we want to nail down is, with technical setup in place, with the emphasis on engagement, you want to make sure that you're designing your emails with that in mind. So again, there's obviously a lot to consider with email, and there are a lot of hoops to kind of jump through to make sure we get to this point. But what you want to do is design your emails with high engagement in mind. So we speak with a number of clients that the nuances that go into this, and I was just speaking with someone today where they reached out to me. Their emails were landing in spam. And after some testing, what I found was that they did not actually include their alt tags in all of their images. And that was enough for Gmail to route the email to spam. Another thing that we discuss often is a call to action. So if someone is having trouble with their engagement, they aren't seeing click-throughs, we may look and see what kind of call to action that they have in place. And so, yeah, ultimately, what we're trying to hone in on here is just how important this is, and what it takes to design an email that's going to be highly engaged with.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah. So, why is design important? We as humans need good design. Not only is it going to help increase your engagement metrics, which is going to help increase your inboxing, it also helps convey your message. So make sure that your call to action is easily visible from when a person opens their email, either on their phone or their computer. Minimal competition with other links. Good design allows the reader to understand how to engage with the content as the way that you intended. So having a whole bunch of competition of where to go is not helpful. Make sure that the images and content drive the point home, as well as entice the reader to keep reading. It is functional on purpose. Good email design catches the reader's eye. It keeps them going. It keeps them scanning. It gets them to not only open the email, but also click through from the email. Another thing to just keep in mind, a couple quick hints here. Make sure that you are keeping your eye on engagement metrics. Use alt tags. We kind of discussed this already before. As Alex said, it can cause deliverability issues if you are not putting your alt tags in your images. Again, if you get an email, the image doesn't open and there's no alt tag, people might not know what you are trying to do because there's no message being said. Make sure to also test your designs regularly, even if you have an ongoing engagement program or a series of emails that are on sort of auto deployment. Make sure that you are testing those designs regularly as well. And make sure that it's device agnostic. Understand people have different habits. Some people are checking on their phone, some people are checking on their computers. So that being said, I always recommend to my clients it's called a golden triangle. So think of an inverted triangle. At the top, you're going to have your headline, your brand logo, so people understand what you're saying and who you are. All of that will drive down to the center, which should be your CTA. So in that inverted triangle, you'll see all three important points. Another thing just to keep in mind, make sure your fonts are legible. On phones, anything smaller than the 13-point font is very difficult to read. Make sure to also be optimizing your images for various devices. The resolution that I recommend is a 72 dpi. Go ahead and give that to your designers, and they can help render your images correctly. I also listed here some important Gmail dimensions. These are really great to just hold on to. You will receive this presentation afterwards, so you'll have it for your own record or to hand on to your designer. Another thing I always want to let people know is make sure to use more simple programming language. Do not use style sheets, JavaScript, or any sort of lengthy coding. This might cause deliverability issues. One other note I always think is really important is avoid a similar font and background color. It can make it difficult to read, and or it might make it seem like you're trying to hide some text, and that would make you look like that would make you look like one of the bad guys. So I think that is just helpful to summarize some of the things that we were talking about in this last section. Again, we're trying to increase that engagement because that's just a really important metric for Gmail. So I think it's important to drive a couple of these points home. Like Alex had said, we do have A/B testing features, so make sure to test that subject line and that preview text. See what entices people to open that email, and make sure to test some of the content in the email and the calls to action. Also, make sure that your visual indicators like diagonal lines or even arrows are used to show people where to go or how to engage or what to click on or to keep scrolling. For creating hierarchy, make sure to use headings, subheadings, bullet points, in that sort of order to create that sort of hierarchy for simple scanning and scrolling of your content. Again, make sure also to understand that the sort of unsubscribe, that's not necessarily a bad feature. Don't try to hide it. Remember, people can gain information, gain knowledge, no longer need it. So they're willing to say, thank you for all of this information. This isn't relevant for me anymore. I'm willing to leave. It's much better than having them mark it as spam. Again, the path to unsubscribe should be paved in gold. Also, your HTTP links should be HTTPS. This helps with inbox placement because it's a security thing. We don't want to see any HTTP links. And then use somebody's actual name in the subject line. I have seen this work. It's increased email open rates by 26%. And some of those emails achieved a 28% ROI on average. 50% of the companies say that they saw an increase in consumer engagement through general personalization. So again, it's just a really good tip and trick to use.
All right. Thanks, Matt. So, with everything we've discussed today, we've really tried to just paint the picture as to everything that goes into Gmail deliverability. However, there is no magic bullet. And so we thought it'd be helpful to kind of summarize our presentation today with a few points to leave you with. And so we're going to start with the first one here. So while authentication is going to be important, it's not going to fix a permission issue. What we mean by that is, with authentication in place, while that is great, it isn't going to necessarily guarantee an email is going to land in someone's inbox. And it certainly won't guarantee that the email lands in the inbox if that person has not requested your email. That goes hand in hand with tricking the system or trying to game Gmail. We touched on the promotions tab. Their algorithm is way too sophisticated for those kind of techniques. They may work in the short term, but certainly not in the long term. You also want to target your messaging to certain subsets. That ties in with segmentation. So the more that you can do that, the better. There are different ways you can do that. Customer type, region, products. It is certainly limitless in terms of the possibilities there. Also designing your messages. So we touched on, we had an entire section on designing those messages with engagement in mind. That is certainly at the forefront of what you should be considering when you're creating your emails. And lastly, making sure that your users are opted in. That's going to give you the best chance to reach the inbox. All right, so we hope that you've enjoyed our presentation today. There's a lot to discuss when it relates to Gmail deliverability. And we would certainly encourage you to reach out to your AM or your CSM to schedule a meeting with a deliverability consultant on our team. We'd love the opportunity to explore different strategies with you to help improve your inboxing.
All right. So thank you so much for attending. We really appreciate you joining us for today's webinar. At this point, we will now open it up for Q&A.